Howdy neighbor, how is your garden growing? Me, in my garden, today we're going to be talking about the vegetables, fruits, and flowers that you should be growing in the month of October right here in the Sunshine State. And as always, I'm going to be using my handy dandy Wild Floridian garden planner to help me know what to plant and when to plant it. Let's start first with vegetables. When it comes to the month of October here in Florida, we're starting to move out of the warm weather and into the cold weather, or at least the advice is going to make it seem like that because it's still really warm in the month of October, which means that things are going to be a little bit different depending on how far north or south you are in the state. If you live in South Florida, you can do all the things. You can do warm weather crops, you can do cold weather crops, you could be starting your warm weather crops by seed, or you could be doing them as transplants. Similar, you could be starting your cold weather crops by seeds at this time of year. And of course, when I'm talking about warm weather crops and cold weather crops, when I say warm weather crops, I mean things like tomatoes, peppers, beans, eggplants, and corn. And when I talk cold weather crops, I'm talking about things like onions, carrots, radishes, beets, lettuce, and of course all of our brassicas like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. Now when it comes to North and Central Florida, they're going to be more similar than different at this time of year, which is that most of the focus when it comes to seed starting needs to be on cold weather crops because the temperature is going down just a little bit, just slightly, but more so the actual sun intensity is starting to drop. So a lot of our cold weather crops can start to handle what is happening, even if you're going to start your cold weather crops in beds, which I know in the month of October, that's on my game plan. Now, when it comes to warm weather crops, technically we're not supposed to be starting them in October, but there is a workaround. If you're wanting to get things like tomatoes and peppers going, instead of trying to start them by seed in this month, you can start by grabbing some transplants. So even if you're feeling like you're behind, there is a way around it. Now, of course, because last month you were able to start warm weather crops by seeds, and every year is a little bit different. If this year we're staying a little bit warmer, you could still try to push the limits and start them by seed. Let's dig a little bit deeper into the vegetables that we could be growing this month. So for those of you guys who are still able and wanting to do warm weather crops, whether you're starting by seed or if you're going to grab some from the store, if you're thinking about peppers, well, right now would be the time to think about doing those sweet peppers. I'm talking about your bell peppers. I'm talking about your banana peppers. Those are the ones we want to be considering doing at this time of year. And for me, if you're thinking about growing so many peppers, I am definitely recommending sweet banana peppers. I don't know if you've seen in the past months how many peppers have been behind me, but banana peppers have hands down been the winner. They have banana peppers. I've had so many, I don't even know what to do with them. But if you're not as familiar with banana peppers, oftentimes you'll see these pickled to be added to sandwiches or pitas, but they're a mild pepper that can pretty much be used in place of any bell pepper. The biggest difference is one, the color is a little bit different. It's kind of got more of a bright green for the pepper, or it moves into kind of a bright yellow, and then it moves into oranges and reds. And I think one of the bigger differences from a cooking or using it in food perspective is the fact that it is a thin-walled pepper versus a bell pepper, which is a thick-walled. Really what that means is that when you cut it, just like how thick is the pepper, and that can make a difference if you're going to be adding heat to the pepper. So if you're going to add it to things like chilies or stews, you're going to want to cook these peppers less than you would a classic bell pepper. Now, if you're also considering doing peppers and you're heading to the classic big box store, you might see a pepper called California Wonder. And in general, I have not been a fan of it, but it might be because I've been planting it at the wrong time of year. Because for me, I have allowed those bell peppers to survive through the summer, and as the weather has just dipped 3 to 5 degrees and the sun intensity has come down, these California Wonders, they're starting to produce. At first they started to produce little peppers, but now they're starting to get bigger and bigger, which has got me thinking that maybe all this time I've been doing it wrong, and instead of growing California Wonders in the spring, I needed to be growing them in the fall. So if you're looking for something to try out this fall when it comes to classic bell peppers and something that you can easily find at a lot of stores, you may want to give California Wonders a shot. But if you're looking for something that's supposed to be more of a sure bet, y'all have been recommending things like Carolina Wonders and Charleston Bells as something more classically like a bell pepper that works here in Florida. But what do you guys think? When it comes to fall, what is your favorite pepper to be growing down here in Florida? Now let's talk tomatoes. While this time of year you could be doing all of those small tomatoes that do so well here in Florida, I'm talking about things like grape tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, yellow pear tomatoes, all those tomatoes that are kind of in that 1 ounce, 2 ounce range. And of course, a favorite for Florida, which is Everglades tomatoes. which grow so well, they might become a weed in your garden once you get them established. And of course, if you want to learn more about Everglades tomatoes, go ahead and check out this video right here. But really, when it comes to fall, we want to look at, if you're gonna get the big tomatoes, this is the time of year. When I'm talking big tomatoes, I'm talking about those ones with 4 ounces, 8 ounces, 10 ounces, 12 ounces, maybe even up to 16 ounces, which would be a pound. Tomato that is a whole pound. That's a big tomato. Those are the type of tomatoes that you are longing for. This is the time of year and one of the last months that you should really consider, especially for North or Central Florida, even with transplants. And the reason is we want to get these plants in the ground. We want to get them established, get their roots nice and happy and healthy, and give them time to produce these big hunking fruits before you have the potential of a cold snap or even a freeze. Now, if you live in a zone 10 and you're not technically in South Florida, you could still consider doing these even from seedlings at this time of year. And of course, if you want to learn more about how to start plants by seed, you can go ahead and check out this video right here. It is a step-by-step guide on how to start seeds. And of course, all these videos that I'm recommending, I'm going to put at a playlist, my October Ultimate Guide playlist, at the end of this video. Now, for me personally, I have been focused on, of course, Cherokee purple tomato. Those did really well for me last season, and that was spring, so I'm really looking forward to see how big those tomatoes can get here in the fall. I'm also focused on one that I recommended all throughout the spring, which was 4th of July hybrids, which I know some of you have started to go and find some of the seed packets, and those are working really well for germinating and sprouting. So if you're considering having something that's maybe not quite so big, kind of more in that 4 to 7 ounce range, 4th of July hybrid's a really good one for that. Whereas those purple Cherokees, they're going to be more in that 8 to 12 ounce range, so you'll get a lot more of a meaty tomato. Now let's talk a little bit about cold weather crops. When it comes to cold weather crops, of course you can get things like lettuce started, and I know so many of you guys want to get that lettuce started so you can start getting your fresh salads. And I'm right with you. I know in the month of October, I'm gonna definitely be focusing on seed starting straight into the beds with lettuce. And when it comes to varieties, I'm really all about that butter crunch. Butter crunch is such a great, just base for a salad that I really am gonna be growing a lot of it. But I'm curious to hear, what type of salads are you guys gonna be growing? Or lettuces? So salads, besides doing a butter crunch, there are other options out there for getting our vitamin K. Things like kales and of course spinach. And if you're looking to grow spinach, now is the time to get your spinach started. Now, speaking of greens, you might be thinking about those bigger greens, and this would be the time of year, especially if you want to start them by seed, is to get those brassicas going now. That's right. Let's get those Waltham 29s in the ground now. And if you're not familiar with Waltham 29s, that is actually the broccoli that I recommend if you're thinking about growing broccoli here in Florida. Broccoli is an amazing thing to grow here in Florida because it is so versatile and gives us so many uses for a huge amount of the season. We can use the sprouts and things like wraps. We can use the leaves in place of spinach leaves in salads and smoothies. And as those leaves get bigger, we can of course use them in things like stews and stir fries. And then eventually we actually get a broccoli head, which I don't know about you, but we are big fans of broccoli in this household. But not only are we gonna be focused on growing broccoli this month, for me, I'm also gonna be looking at growing lanceolato, AKA dino kale. When it comes to kale, for me, this is the one that it goes and goes and goes. This is a great one if you're looking for a spinach substitute, if you are looking for something to add to smoothies or to create salads or to make kale chips. It's got a lot of options. And even though you get it started now, it's gonna go really far into the hotter season when we get into next year. So it's a good one to get established now, and so that you get the benefits not only through the fall, but the winter and even spring next year. Now, because we're heading into fall, we might be thinking all about seed starting because I told you it's the classic vegetable garden season, but some of you were overachievers. Some of you were very wise. Some of you put in the effort over the summertime, and you've got those hot weather crops, and October starts to become the time of year, especially for things like sweet potatoes and roselle, that they need to be harvested. Now, for those of you who've been growing sweet potatoes and have been thinking to yourself, I am not sure how to know when they are ready. Because here in Florida, we don't do the normal thing that the northern things do. See, typically the northerners, they just wait for the leaves to die and then they go, oh, it's time to harvest. But here in Florida, especially if you live in a zone 9 or zone 10, those leaves may never die back on you. Or if they do, it's just for a very tiny period. And that tiny period is well beyond when you potentially should have been harvesting. So the quick trick to know is if you're looking to see if it's time to get your sweet potatoes, is one, just to count how many months that it's been since you first put them in the ground. And that's gonna be 4 to 6 months. Item 2 is that you just go and you pull back the leaves and you look for those tubers to be poking out. If you start seeing some of the tubers poking out, go ahead and dig up that area. You don't actually need to pull the whole area. If you dig up an area and you find that there's really nothing ready, you can go ahead and just leave it in the ground for another month. But if you're starting to see some pretty good sized tubers, well, just go ahead and dig up that bed and get your sweet potatoes. And if you join me for my Plan With Me session for fall, you know that harvesting sweet potatoes is on my list for the month of October. Another thing that you should be monitoring is, of course, your roselles. Your roselles, if you put them in the February, March, or April time period, they potentially have been flowering for you, or they're putting out their calyxes. Now, if they haven't flowered yet, then it's not time to harvest. But if they've been flowering and dropping off, then you're probably at the time to start harvesting them and collecting them. You can refrigerate them so that you can get a whole bunch of them so that you can go ahead and make some roselle jam, which I can tell you, my dad, who's super picky, even he loves roselle jam. The other thing to be watching out for is if you did do summer crops, is to be considering it's about time to start cleaning everything out, whether they produced or not, so that you can make way for more of your classic vegetables like lettuces and tomatoes and peppers. So the month of October tends to be the kind of tough choice time period, especially as we get towards the end of the month of, are you going to try to let your hot weather crops finish, or are we going to just sacrifice them and move on into some of our classic crops? You don't have to make the decision this month, but you're pretty darn close to making that decision. Now, if you are one of those people who wants to avoid the choice of deciding whether you get rid of the hot weather crops and starting your cold weather crops, well, you may want to consider adding some additional beds. And October is one of the first months that I would really recommend if you really want to expand your vegetable garden, adding large beds, adding trellises. The weather has dropped just enough that early in the morning you can knock out some pretty big projects on the weekends. So if you're thinking about that, October would be the month for that. And if you're considering getting metal raised garden beds and you would like to know what brand that I use and the one that you see in all these videos, go ahead and check out this 2-year review where I go over how they're holding up and some of the key features that you might want to consider. Let's talk herbs, because they are one of the best return on investments for your garden. Also, they are the spice of life, or at least the spices and herbs that you want to add to your dishes. And if you're growing tomatoes and peppers and all these great things, you might want to add some flavoring. And one of the most economical ways to do that is to grow it yourself. So when it comes to the month of October, there are lots of herbs that you could be starting here in Florida. Everything from chives and dill and parsley, and of course, one of the favorites is basil. And if you're interested in doing the most classic herbs to be adding to your dishes, you could consider adding garlic. Which brings my question to you. Which herbs are you going to be trying to start in the month of October down here in Florida? Now, let's debate in the comments. Which herb, if you could only do one, would be the one that you would recommend to your neighbors? For me, it's gonna be basil. With the dishes that I see you guys making, the dishes that I make, I feel like basil is one of the best ones to do, especially if we're gonna have those large tomatoes. I think fresh basil, fresh giant tomato, I mean, goodness gracious, we're almost basically to caprese. So, which ones would you recommend? Is it basil or something else? Now, before we move on from vegetables, let me give you guys a word of warning, because it is the month of October, and October, not only being at the beginning of the classic vegetable garden season, is also at the beginning of the classic holiday season. And nothing can get your well-planned garden, your well-started garden off track like the holidays. Whether it's Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, or any of the other holidays, there is so much to celebrate in the fall and into the early winter that it is very easy to get distracted from our gardens. Forget to water them, forget to pull weeds, forget to up-pot our transplants, forget to up-pot our seedlings, forget to put our seedlings in the ground, forget to clear out the beds or harvest. There are so many tasks that we're doing at this time of year, and at the same time, there's all these events with family and friends. Now, I am not telling you to skip the holidays with family and friends. I personally feel like that is a huge priority, but I do want to get that ahead of you so that you can start to think about it as you plan all these holiday activities, that you make sure that you're doing at least enough to maintain your vegetable garden or any of your gardens through the holiday season. Let's talk fruit. And there is only one fruit that I'm going to be talking about this month, and it's going to be strawberries. Whether you live in North Central or South Florida, you should be considering adding strawberries to your garden. Now, if you're in North and Central Florida, you're a bit on the late side to be focusing on things like bare root strawberries, though you can always push the limits and order some bare root strawberries. And if you're looking for a bare root strawberry to pick, I highly recommend Albion. Those have worked very well for me and for many of you. And if you're interested in picking them up, I will put a link in the description below, and maybe there'll be a link right here. And if you're looking for other varieties, some of the common ones that other Floridians use are ones like Chandler, ever sweet, ever bearing, and of course, quinol. Now, I don't recommend it because it's necessarily the best strawberry to grow here in Florida, but it is the one that is easiest to obtain. So if you are considering starting strawberries and you need something that's easily accessible, you may want to consider getting one of those quinol strawberries from Home Depot, Lowe's, or your local hardware store. Now, do not worry if you haven't gotten your bare root strawberries and it's the month of October, because even though technically we shouldn't be starting them in October, it's still a great time of year to grab transplants. A tip that came from one of my members is that a lot of the strawberry growers in Central Florida are actually starting their sales more in October because they have established plants. So if you're looking for some of those established plants from our strawberry growers, October is actually the month to start looking for them. Now, a few other tips before we move into flowers. October technically starts the beginning of the transitional time period as we go towards drought season. It's not actually drought season yet because we will tend to get a lot of rain. Whether it is the final throes of monsoon rain that come in a single weekend, or a tropical storm, or a tropical depression, or goodness gracious, a hurricane, we still tend to get a lot of rain in the month of October. It just tends to happen kind of all at once, which leads to one of my tips for you is outside of doing any preparation for storm activity, you do need to consider making sure that your sprinklers are on, or that you have some method to get all these plants established, because you cannot count on consistent rain throughout the month of October. And an additional tip is, in order to help your soil hold on to whatever moisture, is to add mulch. Mulch, like a wood chip mulch, is amazing at being able to hold moisture and retain it and become a sponge. And it's kind of dual purpose in the month of October. One, if you get a lot of dumping rain, it can absorb a lot of it so you don't drown your plants. And two, is it does a really good job at slow releasing moisture. So if you don't have things like sprinklers, or even if you do have sprinklers, it helps kind of even out the water throughout the days and weeks during October. And another benefit of doing it like a wood chip mulch at this time of year is we just got through the summertime, and I don't know about you, but the weeds tend to explode during the summertime. And you can use your wood chip mulch to actually help start to suppress some of the weeds, which allows you to reduce how many chemicals that you're using around your plants. Now let's talk flowers. In the month of October, there are so many things still blooming, especially here in Central and South Florida. And when it comes to our wildflowers, there are so many native wildflowers that are starting to come back into bloom. Things like tropical sage, which of course my favorite is the flamingo pink, but there are other colors, so you could get it in the kind of coral red or the classic white. Also at this time of year, we're starting to get blue curls starting to bloom, plus things like privet senna are coming back in bloom, which have a very tropical look and are a host plant to all the yellow butterflies. In addition to that, if you're looking for shrubs that can bloom, firebush is still blooming really strong here in Florida, and it's getting ready to set even more berries as our birds migrate through. And if you're looking for some additional berry plants to add to your garden, Beautyberry right now is putting out huge amounts of berries, and this is great both for our migrating birds, but also for us if we want to make a classic beautyberry jam. And one of the great ones that's in bloom right now is, of course, muhly grass. And if you're not familiar with muhly grass, well, you probably are familiar with muhly grass. You've seen it around town. You see it in people's landscapes, but you probably just didn't know that's what it was. Muhly grass is one of those standard landscaping plants that can add a lot of texture and some greenery to a space, but at this time of year, it starts to put out its great plumes that are a purplish pink color. They add this kind of cottage, ethereal, just clouds of pink and purple that are just gorgeous to have in your garden. They like full sun, and they tend to do really well in areas that stay very dry, and of course they love our sandy soil. They add, of course, the additional benefit of feeding our migratory birds with their little seeds. And overall, I just think they're really pretty, and you should consider adding them to your garden. And when it comes to some other big, bold flowers, if you're looking for some Florida-friendly plants, of course, there's the non-native alamanda. If those are those big yellow flowers that you're seeing all over the place. And of course, one that I just added to my garden is the camellia. Camellias are not native to Florida, but are Florida friendly, but they are one of those plants that can give you that rose cottage garden vibe without actually being a rose, and can handle our high heat and our intense humidity, and in general do pretty well if you can get them set up in the right conditions. And if that's got you excited to start creating a garden with blooms all year round, plus know when to go ahead and grow the vegetables, you should go ahead and start pre-ordering your Wild Floridian garden plant right here, and you can click this link right here. And if you want to learn everything from fall tips to how to start seeds, plus tips on bare root strawberries and much more, go ahead and check out this playlist right here. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.